Welcome to the live stream. Today, clean architecture and dependency injection. I did it. We started the show without twisting our tongue on the dependency injection and clean architecture and dependency inversion. We have a lot to cover today. It's going to be action-packed. We are going to be reviewing a little YouTube video from Fireship. If you don't know, Fireship does... Sorry, not Fireship. I made the mistake of doing it again. I will mention Fireship's course in one of my comments, but what we were looking at is a video by Code Aesthetic. That was a clerical error on my part on the agenda. The second thing we'll be doing is we will be looking at a Pragmatic clean architecture course by Milan Jovanovic, who is now on vacation. And Milan was also one of my podcast guests on the Technologies podcast. And he launched a course, a very simple pragmatic course on how to apply clean architecture in a C#.NET project. And you don't need a lot of background, you don't need a lot of experience, and I have access to it. We can do a quick preview. And I got some discount codes to share at the end of the stream, so that you can all check it out. It's pretty cool. He has tons of code examples. I don't know why, but Milan loves writing code examples and streaming code examples and live coding. So there's a lot of that here. The theoretic part is on point, but then it's just code examples upon code examples upon code examples. So if you ever wanted to see like an ideal project and what to look out for and what framework, what libraries to use specifically in the .NET C# ecosystem, Milan has you covered. I did speak with Milan. I do believe he'll be joining us as a guest at some point in the future, next few months, on the Technologies podcast to check out some comments and some feedback that he'll be receiving over the course, because I think it's going like crazy. Like everybody's jumping on it. So there's something good about it if he can sell quite a few hundreds or perhaps even thousands to this point in the first week of launching. So welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us. As always, this is our 1 hour on Thursdays, 4:30 p.m. Central European time, where you get free access to me rambling and sharing my expertise, and hopefully you'll keep me on track by asking tough questions in chat. Hello, everybody. Hello, Sanam. Hello, Saif. Saif, well, we already have a question. Let's start there. So to be clear, today is about clean architecture and dependency injection. Both topics very welcome. If there be any questions regarding dependency injection, I'll take those first, or else we'll just go as you post them. Yes. So Milan Jovanovic's course has already been linked in chat. Feel free to check it out while we check out the Code Aesthetic video. But I'm happy to take on some questions. Let's start with Saif. If someone asked me in an interview, what is clean architecture in general, what should I say? That's a good question. I mean, if you don't know, I would say you don't know, but you would like to try it. That would be my first go-to answer. Because clean architecture is not really something that you should be striving for as a skill. Clean architecture is, let's say, an outcome of good craftsmanship practices, but they are subservient, let's say, to providing value to the business. Right? So you need to sort of measure your own ability of understanding why and when you need to use clean architecture. Like describing what it is, it's very simple. It's an idea termed by Uncle Bob from his book Clean Architecture, and it's one of many, let's say, enterprise architecture models that are trying to separate your system out into layers. And clean architecture is just one of those, let's say, options that you have. They are really similar. Vertical slice architecture, hexagonal architecture, onion architecture. I believe He also there's a new one called Screaming Architecture and Clean Architecture. They're all really similar. We did go into a little bit more detail last time. I do recommend you check out last week's video if you want a little bit more diagrams on what clean architecture is. To recap quickly, clean architecture has a infrastructure layer, domain layer, application layer, and some adapters. Some versions of clean architecture also talk about use cases. Then there are some architectural models that only talk about use cases in the absence of clean architecture. I believe that was by Jacob Ivarsson. Quite an old book, actually. Oh, Saif, let me know if you're happy with that answer. Otherwise, we'll continue. Roberto is also answering Saif in chat. It's a design pattern that allows the business logic to be separate from its delivery mechanism. Think of concentric circles with the app logic in the center and everything that supports interaction with other systems, including your eyes, that, of course. I wouldn't tie it together. It's definitely not a pattern. There is very little patterns in clean architecture. It's more to do with principles, I would say. Clean architecture is the thing you get as an output if you apply solid principles to your overall architecture. That means everybody on the team, not just one developer, not just one department. But good point on the keywords there. Yeah, it's trying to separate out business logic from the delivery mechanism. And here I believe delivery mechanism, not continuous delivery in that sense, that from Kubernetes or however else is being deployed, but from the delivery mechanism of are you using a web protocol to deliver business logic? Are you using a protobuf mechanism? Are you using GraphQL? So you're trying to separate out the user facing, the sort of outside facing, really the service layer, if I use that terminology. That mechanism from the actual machinery, the wiring that provides the compute that controls and represents, and in object-oriented terms, encapsulates the business logic. But very good explanation. I like it. Definitely shorter than what I just said. So, it's also a blessing and a curse sometimes. Very good. Stefan. If I need to use some library in my business logic, is it okay if my domain layer depends on that specific library? I would say no. But that's just my gut, that's just my gut feeling. Could you name a concrete example? If you need a library in your business logic, then that business logic, if that business logic library was built for your business and requested for your business, and it just happened to be outsourced and it happens to be in library form, then it will be fine. But generally, if you're using a library that doesn't know about your business and your business is relying on that, then that would already make it external, at least into the application layer. Right? So if I can use that library and you can use that library and my neighbor can use that library, then if we're not in the same business, then there's something about the use case of why you're using that library that is unique to your business. It is that thing that is unique to your business that is probably the domain. The library is probably some form of commodity. If it's a commodity or if it's just a secondary little utility that you're using, then it's definitely either in the application or sometimes even in the infrastructure layer. It's a good question. Again, hard to answer without knowing specifics. I would be very skeptical, let's say. To give you some numbers off the top of my head, I would say 9 out of 10 times your suggestion, there would be something weird about your suggestion. But there are exceptions. So, all right, let's go. Shadam, as a senior software engineer, do you think someone really needs to have an in-depth knowledge of concepts like clean architecture on it, blah, 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 monolithic? What are your thoughts on this? I would say no on the architectures. Yes on domain-driven design for a senior developer. Our industry is about solving problems. It's not about engineering. So it's very important to have this sort of, this understanding that we are in business. We're being paid to solve business problems. And oftentimes you will see where if you're solely focusing on your craftsmanship skills or just, how to make this prettier, how to make this more elegant, how to refactor faster, how to make this more performant, if you do not understand whether that serves some underlying, or I won't theorize, you might say, let's talk about TDD. Your business sells cars, you start doing TDD. Will you sell more cars? Now, somebody very senior in their business and their software, somebody who has business understanding and good programming skill, will be able to tell you, yes, if we use TDD, we will probably sell more cars. There might actually be a correlation there. Or maybe it's the inverse. If they don't use TDD, we might sell less cars because we might have more issues. If our bug rates go up, that might lower our rating on review sites, and then maybe next quarter we sell less cars. Maybe there's a correlation there. Like it would be hard to prove the causality loop with statistical significance, but a programmer with good business understanding will be able to connect that intuitively. It's like, yeah, of course, this is better for the business. Like, we ship, even if we don't ship faster, at least we ship the right thing with higher quality sooner, even if it involves more time. Especially when it involves more time. You often don't want to ship everything that's on the to-do list. You want to figure out what of the to-do list you don't want to ship. There's a correlation between saying no and your seniority level, right? So as you grow as an engineer, you will sort of learn how to navigate saying no to certain requests. It's like feature creep, especially, but sometimes even just deploying a too polished version of the product before proving any kind of market demand or business value or even just business improvement. Maybe you don't even have metrics, right? So these things are nice to know, but it comes down to personal preference. I would recommend that you know one of them, though, because especially in the C# world, you might have to navigate a project that is architectured that way, and you might be getting feedback from other developers that, hey, this is in the wrong layer, or this is breaching certain encapsulation rules. And if you don't know any of these, if you consciously want to avoid, or you just consciously hate on these architecture principles, you'll definitely encounter friction at work, from other developers, right? So it is not, let's say, it is not in your best interest to be stubbornly opposing them without good reason. That's for the architectures. For domain-driven design, I would say domain-driven design should be mandatory before you even start programming. As a hobby programming, no problem. But you need to understand how your programming skill benefits the business. That's DDD primarily. What languages what does the business use? Why is this feature being paid for? Okay, now I do need to cheat a little bit and check LinkedIn, because last time I missed half of your questions. So today I'm checking very diligently. So we had a comment. Is this being recorded? Yes, it's being recorded. It is being recorded. Did I miss any? Someone asked me, domain layer shouldn't depend on the library. Yes, thank you, Pavle. Okay, starting an hour. Yes, very good. Main functions solve business problems. Yes, thank you, Roberto. Good. So I did confirm that StreamYard is dropping some chat messages, but we'll deal with it. Actually, it's not dropping messages. There's some delay. Good, no problem. We only have 1 hour. This is good enough. You're here to learn about what I'm about to screen share. Let's screen share. Present. This is one of the few. This is one of the few window. This one. So let's look at code aesthetic. Now, I need your feedback here, because I need to know. Can you hear sound if I hit play? You got sound? You good? Hitesh, I will answer your question in a little bit. I need some lifetime from chat. Did you hear sound when I'm playing this? Okay, I'm not getting any responses from chat. I'll just have to look. Okay, let's see. No, there's no sound. Okay, right. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's figure it out. What do I need here? Why is there no sound? There's no sound because share tab audio window. Okay, that's what we need to do. Okay, figured it out. We just need to get the right one. I see. The problem was it's an incognito tab. And if it's in an incognito tab, it won't like me. So if I do this, you are very helpful. Thank you very much. I can see chat. There's no sound. I am fixing it. This is the last try. If it doesn't work, then we do something else. Okay. Share tab audio. Now, it's on screen. One more time. And
side effects that we're going to cover. We have dependency injection is a term I don't love.
Okay. Sound? Yes? No? Is it too loud? Just waiting for the response. So many people in chat. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Thomas. Hello, Itzy. Nice of you to join. I missed you last time. It works now. Yes, thank you. Okay, we're good. Just adjusting volume a little bit. Perfect. Let's go.
Because it sounds a lot more fancy than it is. Dependency injection is simply when you have a piece of code which uses another piece of code, and instead of using that code directly, it's passed in instead. When you pass something in to be used, we call it injection. We inject the dependent code into the code that uses it. While this part is quite simple, it unlocks some very powerful side effects that we're going to cover. We have a business app where users can chat with their coworkers. They can also send pictures and files to each other. When a user sends something, the file gets uploaded to our attachment service. The attachment service is responsible for storing, retrieving, and processing all.
I've seen this pattern so many times that somebody needs to implement, this is your typical ORM essentially. Like you need to upload something, but you have different providers, and then somebody would like to have an exception of, yes, but I don't want it on the cloud. I want it on-prem, or I want it on-prem, and then I want it on-prem on my software, and somebody else wants it on-prem on some other software. I will lower down the plate speed. Thank you very much.
Attachments. We're going to build up this whole service using dependency injection, and we'll see what it enables us to do.
Let me adjust volume a little bit.
Service is all about speed. The attachment, on the other hand, gets uploaded to our attachment service. There's an endpoint in our node service, attachment/upload, that the app connects to and uploads the file. The attachment gets stored on the disk temporarily, processed in a few ways we'll talk about, and then uploaded to its final
destination.
Screen size,
by the way?
The default storage location is an S3, a part of Amazon's web services.
Very good.
It's a simple storage service that lets you put up files and pull them down. We have some code here that takes the uploaded file and then uploads it to S3. Unfortunately, simple and elegant doesn't always like to coexist with business. While S3 is
simple and elegant doesn't always like to coexist with business. I like that. Can you spot, by the way, in the terms of clean architecture, can you spot the layer mismatches just on this piece of code that's on the screen? What on this screen is infrastructure. What on this screen might be a business concern, and what on this screen is an application level concern, if any. Right? Just keep that in mind as we go forward. This video is about dependency injection, but it all plays in hand with clean architecture. If you don't know how to do dependency injection, especially dependency inversion, these are not the same, you'll have a very hard time applying clean architecture. So it's definitely a recommended practice. It's definitely a recommended principle to practice a lot.
Is nice and straightforward, and most of our clients are okay with it. We have a few firms that don't want us to permanently store their data. This means we actually need our service to handle multiple storage locations. Then, depending on which company a user is from, we need to put their attachments in the right place. Most of these picky clients just give us an SFTP server to connect to, but one really wanted us to use WebDev. Our first thought might be to simply extend our upload code with some if statements. and then have the caller of the upload method pass in where to upload the file. This is awkward for a few reasons. First, this one class has a ton of responsibility, making...
Okay, so we're already going into code smells. Notice how code aesthetic immediately went into handling the various layers of the application, of the, let's say, the service. And the idea behind his narrative is already, oh, there are code smells. Right? So remember what I said earlier. Clean architecture is the output that you get if you refactor an application according to solid principles, or just good, pure domain-driven design, or object-oriented principles. The problem is, a lot of time, if you find yourself refactoring something like this, if you're not refactoring using code smells or some other metric as a guide, what can happen is that, especially if you have multiple people on your team who disagree on how it should be refactored, you can start oscillating, where you refactor something and you're not happy with it, and you can refactor it some other way and you're not happy with it. So it's very possible that you just approach a local minimum in let's say, in local minimum in unhappiness. So the smells go away, but you keep switching 2 different implementations or 3 different implementations. Should this depend on that? Should the other thing depend on this? I believe who was it? Saif? No. Who asked the question? Stefan. Yeah, Stefan asked the question, should this depend on that? It's very likely that once you get to the real cleaner parts of your code, especially some business level code that depends on infrastructure, it might be very hard to tell for something really simple, should this depend on that or that depend on this? I know how to do both of them easily, but I don't know in what order to put them. That's where your refactoring skill stops, and there's no more just pure refactoring guidelines or even TDD guidelines of which one to pick, which option to pick. And that's when the architecture kicks in. That's when the architecture knowledge kicks in. That's no, wait, these are sort of similar concepts, but this one's in the domain, this one's in the application. Clean architecture tells me that it should be this way around, or this way, depending on how you picture them. Like this should know about that, the domain should not know about the application. So clean architecture is essentially a termination rule for when you're stuck in limbo, not sure where to put something. But you first have to have this desired, let's say, intention to want to move things, and refactor them and say, no, this thing should not be here, this thing should be split, just like code aesthetic is refactoring now on the screen, right? So he's refactoring the code smell of, there's multiple responsibilities in this class. It has bumpy road. It has nested conditions. There's the, I believe, if you extract an interface from this, you'll immediately encounter refused bequest because you have multiple branches and not all methods are used in all branches. And we will see how that evolves
the code pretty
as he moves forward.
Right. There's a lot of paths the code can take,
exactly.
And that makes the code harder to understand.
Mm-hmm. That's what cyclomatic complexity is.
Using the class isn't very simple. We have this one upload function which needs a bunch of info for where we're going to upload the attachment. But what info it needs is very different depending on where it's going. Mm-hmm. If it's AWS, we need the AWS keys. If it's SFTP, we need the address and...
You've probably seen this before, especially this. That's on the optionals. You can see the question marks here, the question marks on the types. I just had a refactoring problem going on with one of my coaching clients where they had an encounter like this, where there's an if statement, like it can go this way or that way. We can use it 2 different ways. But there are actually 2 different use cases, but somebody decided to put them in a common abstract class. So when you start using question marks for nullable types, you might think that what it means is that, oh, maybe there's an SFTP host. Maybe there is one. But that's not what it means. That means that if I'm on branch A, there is always a host, or you have to crash. And when I'm on branch B, there's never a host. That's not the same as there might be a host, right? So maybe is not the same as always on this branch and never on this branch. When you have this kind of discrepancy in your types, it's definitely a signal that it is being abused by some speculative common abstraction that should be split apart instead. This is generally happening when DTOs or configuration issues from the infrastructure level or the application level leak into the domain layer. This is also why one of the reasons why we try to keep the domain layer separate from these concerns, because there's usually many ways to branch out and only one way that the domain level can work, right? So the domain layer is usually the least combinatorially complex area where you can get derivations in configuration. That's why you want to separate it out from all the different things you can configure so that you don't have these problems with these nullable types. Because these nullable types are then what happen with all your null checks, your guard blocks, your if checks, generics, if you have to typecast, hardcast generics, or type narrow. It just end up writing a bunch of code that honestly shouldn't be there.
Private key. And web dev needs a URL and auth key. So we're kind of forced to have a bunch of these optional variables that need to be filled out in certain cases. And then comments to tell you which ones to fill out.
Yeah.
This makes it pretty easy for the caller to make a mistake. And finally, the part of the code that actually calls upload over here needs to have all of this destination-specific context to perform the upload. But really, at this phase, it just wants to upload. The part of the code that knows best which company a user is from and can deduce where the file should go is up here at the beginning of the request. But right now, we're forced to pass all of this information around. Let's see what happens if we use dependency injection instead. Let's create an interface that represents our attachment storage, which contains a key upload method that does what the request handler wants to do, upload an attachment. Then we create 3 different implementations of the storage interface. The configuration for each is passed into their constructor. There's no more optional variables that sometimes need to be set. We require exactly these values, and you get an error if you forget one. So now, once the user is authenticated and we know which company they're from, we create the storage that the request handler should use. Instead of the configuration needing to be passed all the way to the request handler, only the storage is passed to or injected into the request handler. It's not aware of which storage is passed in or where the file is going, it just knows that it can call upload. That said, this construction code is still a little too complex to put here. So let's see if we can clean this up. If we look at the input here, it's really just this company configuration. And the output is the storage, which conforms to the storage interface.
This is a very good example because previously, just before he refactored those 3 things apart, you notice that they were all prefixed with a common terminology. That's already, if the naming of the variables are very common and they start repeating patterns where there's like AWS underscore something, SFTP underscore something, it's definitely telling you that there is a different behaviors going on, different classes going on, that maybe there's a common domain level interface where a infrastructure level implementation differs not only in the methods they have, but also in the way that they have to be configured. And that might be an application level concern. Here you can already see that there's a clear path from the inside and the outside. The storage seems to be the thing that the domain level should know about, the interface of the storage. But there is an implementation level of which one exactly it is, which is an infrastructure level concern. Infrastructure level concerns are those that specify what part, how we interact with something in the outside world. Okay, let's continue.
So we can just move this out to a factory. Great, but saving to the final storage destination is the last step of the process. We have all these other stages that the upload goes through. We run each upload through a virus scanner. This checks the files for signatures of obvious viruses. Then, if the file is an image, we scale it down to a max width of 2500 pixels. This is what we display to the user when they click on an image, because it uses less bandwidth and loads faster. Then the file goes through preview generation. This is basically fully downloading it. On Amazon's S3, we pre-encrypt the files before sending them up. That way, if there's a security breach at Amazon, we can say they're encrypted when we have to send out one of those "we were hacked, by the way."
It's a very smart concept. Don't assume that just because you have it's under a password and you couldn't breach, you couldn't leak, that it won't happen if you have a internal leak on the VPC or something else.
Emails. So let's see how we can make each of these requirements fit cleanly into our service.
Is getting your master's in data science even worth it anymore?
I hate
Absolutely.
it. I'm on the wrong.
Is one of the most
I'm in the incognito tab.
For the virus scanner, we currently use a scanner called
I'm very sorry about that.
However, Synergy's security scanner has much better detection KPIs, and our plan is to switch to it. But sadly, we haven't finalized the deal with Synergy. We're only allowed to test with it in our development environment, not in production.
Oh, I like this.
No worries. We can create a shared interface for our two scanners.
This is also very common in dependency injection and inversion specifically, is that it's okay to just create an interface because you need it to test faster. I see this a lot on the database side, on the infrastructure layer conversations regarding clean architecture and hexagonal architecture. It's like, why should I abstract away my database? My database is really handy. If I create a level of inversion, I might just make it clumsy. Am I really saving any time? Am I saving the business any money? Is this worth it? The answer to all of those is yes, it's worth it, because if you have important compute in your database, or in this case the virus scanner, then if you run your test, you will actually have to boot up the actual virus scanner and scan for viruses. And if you know that application works, if you have a file, it will scan a virus, and it will return some kind of common return payload, or just answer across a known interface that you integrate with, then that will make your test slow. Right? So the business benefit is that even if you just have an implementation detail for an interface, where there's only one production level implementation for the actual use case, but the testing implementation is also part of your production code. Because in this case, the threat protect scanner you use on production, and Synergy you use on the development environment. And these are all part of your production code, because one of them serves value to your end users, and the other one, the Synergy one, the dev one, that one provides value for your development pipeline, for your testing crew, for your QA, for your governance checks, security checks, etc. It's very important to keep this in mind. Don't belittle all the little things you need in order to make your tests run faster and to make them more reliable. It's sometimes more important than just knowing that it might work in production. Don't be afraid to add abstractions.
And on initialization, we pick one,
if you need them,
and inject that one into the request handler.
Typical application level concern, we're configuring something and
when
injecting
we launch
it.
in development mode, Synergy Security is initialized, and in production, the old threat protect scanner is
Very
created.
I love
Our
the graphic
request
on the
handler
right.
just scans the files, but doesn't know which scanner is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
For image scaling, we use the Sharp library. In order to inject that, we simply wrap it up in an image scaler interface. The interface also contains a method which tells us if an attachment supports scaling.
Mm-hmm.
We inject it into our upload request and only scale if the attachment supports it.
Mm-hmm.
Preview generation is the most complex given how many types of attachments there could be. We have an interface that represents the different preview generators. It takes the input file and then returns the preview image.
Mm-hmm.
We have one implementation that handles document files like Word docs, slides, etc. One for videos, which extracts the thumbnail from the video.
And notice how the interfaces here are very, very using very generic primitives, or just very mundane value objects. It's like, this is a file name, it's a string, and it returns a URL or string to a preview link. Like, you might actually have value objects to capture what kind of string that is. And Milan has that example as well in his course. But it's very, don't make your interfaces very too specific so that you would have to type narrow. So don't create a video preview generator whose generate method requires a video file name. Don't create a document preview generator and then the generate method requires a document file name, especially if it's generic, and then you have to do that weird question mark extends X and but only if X matches this on this subclass. Don't. That's taking generics too far, and that's a common let's say negative angst about generics from language for language sort of opposed by languages that don't support generics for this very reason, and that would be your PHPs, that would be your Go, I believe, and some of the newer languages where generics are frowned upon because they're much better object-oriented ways of handling these concerns. Let's continue.
And
I'm going to skip ahead because I want to go to Milan's
the
course.
image one can thankfully just reuse our image scalar. Scales.
I love the graphic on the right, which is of the larger this one to actually really highlight something as simple as sending a video message or sending an attachment in a message application can be this complex. Now imagine that you're building something for some for some insurance startup or some fintech. How complex the various combinatorics of how you can configure something can become, right? So the whole point of dependency injection, especially in clean architecture, is that you are creating little ports and adapters, if you're from the hexagonal camp, so that you can limit the surface area of how much you need to think about to be able to test and really fix a bug. Because here, if there's a problem with document preview generators, then you can just look up the one that has the problem and solve it. Previously with everything in one file, you can imagine if you have to introduce a new library that you suddenly get 2, 3, 5,000 lines of code of spaghetti, and then nobody wants to maintain that. And God forbid that there are multiple developers working on multiple branches, changing that file at the same time. Having merge conflicts in a large file is one of the biggest process smells that I've seen in large companies. They just don't, they're forced to do merge freezes. They have to merge the main branch. Sorry, they have to freeze the main branch just to be able to merge simple concepts. Okay, very cool. I love the animations on how when he's refactoring. Okay, configuration, very good application layer.
The factory takes in the MIME type of the upload and then returns the right preview generator to use.
Okay.
So now the upload can simply just ask the factory for the preview generator and then use it. And lastly, we have encryption. Without knowing box,
we can script that.
No worries. We can just use a fixed key when running locally.
Okay.
Injection basically just lets us pick and choose from our...
Again, make it easy to run stuff locally. Fake your database. If you have some weird KYC service for your bank, make it easy to fake that so that you can run tests against it. Don't waste time trying to come up with some real production level. If they don't have an integration level test sandbox that is super realistic and easy to isolate and run on your local machine, then just mock them out, fake them, or just make it easy on your local dev to fake the interface and just be able to run tests against it very quickly.
Compatible puzzle pieces.
Do not,
and then slot them in when we need them.
Do not marry your complex
the time in which dependencies are injected varies a bit. A few dependencies are resolved and injected right at startup. This is often the most common scenario in dependency injection. But some dependencies are chosen and injected when a request comes in. In either case, their process is mostly the same. We have some code that accomplishes something, it lists the dependencies it needs, and so we fulfill those needs. You might wonder, why go through the hassle of creating interfaces and injecting things when we only have...
Notice the colors on the screen right now. There's an upload request, an infrastructure level concern, then you have various domain level concerns, the big ones on the small boxes that have the headers, and then you have application level concerns for configuration, which are implementing domain level concerns, which are the interfaces of the things that are being injected into them, right? So this is, even though this video is not about clean architecture per se, it highlights exactly the layers necessary to make a refactoring step like this meaningful, because you're constantly separating out a generic domain level concern with very specific and mutually exclusive infrastructure level concerns, which is AWS versus FTP versus Azure.
Have one implementation.
The dev fake.
We only have one implementation of encryption. Well, there's one big thing we haven't talked about.
Testing. No, it doesn't stop giving me ads. Okay. Note to self, don't play YouTube videos in incognito because my ad blocker is turned off. Sorry about that. You're getting Slovenian ads. Okay.
This means that each of these connection points, we can control what is being used. We've been using this to choose which implementation to use in our production service. But we can also make them use no implementation.
No implementation,
We can use injection to inject fake or mock implementations instead.
Not a fan of mocks.
Which basically means we can slice and dice up our architecture to isolate sections of code during testing. Let's say we want to write a test for our AWS storage class. 3. But because of the encryption, we can't actually check the content of the file and verify that it's correct.
Now, the danger of doing something like this is if what you're doing is actually has important business logic on the S3 side. If you have something very important configured on S3, like some automated conversion check or some security check, then if you're mocking it, then what you're testing is not actually a realistic concern, but only if you have domain level concerns on the S3 side. If you're just doing it as a little file storage, then it's really easy. But it's up to you to understand, when you're mocking something, are you mocking something that has domain level compute, or are you just mocking something that is a very commoditized infrastructure level concern? This is very important, and unfortunately, the hardest thing to learn. It's like mocking is fine, but only if you're mocking infrastructure level problems. If you're mocking something that has domain level compute, you're entering a world of pain because you're making your thing that relies on this mock now behave inconsistently with what you're actually created for the actual domain level implementation.
Get corrupted. Not to worry, let's inject a mock encryption that basically just disables encryption. When the AWS storage class asks us to encrypt a file, we'll just hand back a file that isn't actually encrypted.
Nice.
Works because we've isolated it away from the key store to return. If we want
this is just more examples of how to create testing fakes. Okay.
I'm going to try something new with this.
This is Code Aesthetic with a very short video on dependency injection. Give him a like. I will link it here in YouTube. Give him a like, give him a follow. This has very good content. It's very few videos, but they're amazing. Very clean, very crisp. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. I do need some live sign from you that you're still here in chat. I apologize if this was a little bit on the longer side on the technical difficulties, but we're learning, and we have every Thursday. We're here every Thursday to course correct. Now let's do the thing you're actually here for, which is checking out Milan's new course. I have to tell you, when Milan asked me to review his course, it was crazy. The amount of content he packed into it, the amount of care he went into just making sure that it's really high quality, and I can tell it's really high quality. And I wouldn't say Milan is a masochist, but Milan loves code examples. Like the amount of code examples that are inside the goddamn course it's beautiful. It's beautiful, I have to tell you. Okay, so if you're here, let's share Milan. What you will learn. Yes, this one. Boom. Welcome to Milan's course. Milan launched a new course called Pragmatic Clean Architecture. Now, I'm not cheating. I actually did go to the course as Milan was creating it, but he actually gave me access to the live one. So this is the live course of Pragmatic Clean Architecture. And what I really like is that there's a little bit of theory at the beginning, but oh my God, then when you go into the details, domain, factory patterns, specifics regarding what kind of buses to use, whether to use them or not, how to really configure mediator, because we're after all in a C# environment, whether to use CQRS or not, what to avoid, what to watch out for. And he really goes into a lot of detail on how to use these things, how to configure them. If you just follow the code examples, if you just follow him on screen, you will actually create a fully fledged CQRS clean architecture project in .NET, even if you're a beginner. I think the prerequisites for this course were just 1 year of experience with C#. So it is if you want to learn clean architecture and you think there's so many other things you need to learn first because it's overwhelming, this course, I mean, hats off, raise my hat to Milan. We went into a lot of detail to make this really beginner friendly. But if you're not a beginner, if you already have a lot of experience, this is amazing. The amount of, every single video from the first chapter is just a plethora of code examples. And basically what you're doing is you're pair programming. Like Milan is your buddy, and he's running you through everything. The annoying bits of configuring authentication, the annoying bits of configuring the storage for the authentication mechanism, the middleware for the authentication mechanism, getting through the annoying entity core, the EF core, entity framework configuration options, how to separate them out in different solutions, when that's a good idea, when that's not a good idea, how to wire them up. He even has Dockerized everything. So even if you're concerned that you'll have to do a lot of sysops stuff, that is also in the course. So hats off, if I'm ever doing a course, which Milan now gave me a lot of inspiration to actually start my own course. I have a really good sort of very high standard example to follow. Saddam says, I completed this course and it's amazing. What did you like about the course, Saddam, if you don't mind sharing? I would love to hear. I would love to pass on your feedback actually to Milan, because I will be talking to him in a future podcast, I believe. Plus, what I really like, Milan brought in a little bit of examples from domain-driven design, where he is actually picking out those elements of domain-driven design that are practically useful in clean architecture, even if you don't know the strategic side of domain-driven design, right? So this entire course is extremely tactical. So there's a lot of understanding of that. There isn't a lot of, let's say, whiff on the entire Puritan, object-oriented design, solid principles, etc. That's more what I'm focusing on. This is just purely .NET, C#, entity framework, mediator, clean architecture. If that's your stack, this will cover all the nitty-gritty tactical stuff and nothing else. It is extremely pragmatic, hence the name, Pragmatic Clean Architecture. Is there a Milan for PHP? That's a good question. I think there are some nut jobs of like very those very rigorous Puritan object-oriented let's say zealots who are working on the Symfony project. So I think if you want a Puritan version of this, then Symfony is definitely your PHP equivalent for, let's say, the ecosystem. But I would be very hard pressed to now name off the top of my head somebody who records videos like this. But then again, Milan is a very good YouTuber who has very good examples on his channel and his live streams. So as far as I'm concerned, one of the best examples of clean architecture. I have to say, we don't agree eye to eye on every detail on clean architecture with Milan. Sometimes he's a bit too pragmatic for my taste, especially when it comes to CQRS, a mediator, and whether that makes sense. I like having a little bit more holistic view on this and maybe doing some things out of the box. But it's one of the most amazing courses I saw recently come to the market. That isn't a scam. That isn't just very simple examples, and then like the amount of even just the amount of code examples that are in here, it's crazy good. Like if you don't know how to code, if you don't know how to code C#, if you know how to code C# but you don't know clean architecture, if you know clean architecture but you don't know C#, this is a win-win-win on all fronts. So even if you're just missing one or two axes of skill, let's say, this is a home run. So if you'd like to sign up for the course, I have a little discount code going in the doodly-doo down below. Discount code PCADC20. If you go to Milan's website right now, you'll be able to get a little discount on his course. And this is the link of the course. And I believe there are only 20 of these discount codes, so they're first come, first serve. Disclaimer: I'm not being paid to do any of this. This is not an affiliate marketing thing. I'm just super excited about clean architecture. Milan is a good friend of mine, and I want to help out if I can. And if it helps you out to better yourself in your career and to set a better example in your team about clean architecture, if I can help, so much the better. This is my 1 hour in the week where I get to help the community for free, and you get to have content like this handed to you on a platter, essentially. So you don't have to browse over YouTube. Okay, I have 40 different courses being pitched to me. Which one should I pick? I can have. Oh, we should check some reviews. Let's just sit down. Yes, we should actually check some reviews. Where do I get the reviews? I do want to check that into another tab first, so I know where to go. Don't want to leak anything. Let's check the reviews. Oh, I don't think I can check the reviews because I am already logged in. Enrolled. Yes, courses, clean architecture. I would like to log out, please, and check the reviews. Yes, I think that's the one. Ah, there we go. Ooh, thank you. Okay, we're going off to the page. Here's a few reviews. Ah, Saddam is here. Of course, that's why you wanted me to check the reviews. Top review. I see you. I see what you did there. So it's just a few reviews. I mean, a few. I mean, this launched this week, and it's, the reviews themselves, crazy. And a lot of people here. Pablo, I saw you on chat earlier. Saddam as well. Shout out to John Gallagher. We did exchange a few ideas about domain-driven design, and I believe he did launch a little book recently. Great suggestion, Saddam. That was a great idea. Okay, so I have to run off to another call for the book club in 5 minutes. We can take one more question if there's anything, or I can check my doody-doo in the other tab where chat is not messed up, and we can check if there are any questions that I missed that I would regret not answering right away. No sound. That's the link. Is there a Milan for PHP? Yes, Vladi, we can discuss that in a little bit. What do you think, Pavle? Paule? Why do I not see that in StreamYard? I don't see it, right? Paule, your comment. Yeah, I don't. There are blind spots in my. There we go. What do you think about vertical slice in clean architecture? I love vertical slice architecture. Whenever I'm coaching teams, I do recommend starting off with clean architecture. However, it can be very daunting if the project that you're working on is already well established without vertical slice architecture. Because what's the idea behind vertical slice architecture? The idea is that when I'm making a pull request and that pull request adds some new feature, it is constrained to a single folder. Now, if I create a new feature and the rest of the project, the model layer, and especially the application layer, are not done with clean architecture, then not done with clean architecture or vertical slice architecture, then even though I suddenly decide to just start doing that, I will still have to touch other files to just create all those injection points, maybe ports, that I have to create ports and all those other folders. So even though I might be following vertical slice architecture in a messy code base, there are zero benefits short term. So it's very hard to migrate away from it. If you're starting a new project, definitely vertical slice architecture all the way. Use cases, vertical slice, features, boom. And Milan talks about this as well on one of his YouTube videos. But it's one of those things that, let's say, on the pickiness and the intensity of nuance that vertical slice architecture applies, I would be very hard-pressed to say, okay, when we're refactoring the project, there is actually a business value in applying DDD, TDD, domain-driven design with clean architecture, I can see the business benefit of that. Moving a project that has clean architecture but no vertical slice to then refactor it completely to go to clean architecture with vertical slice, I don't see a clear business benefit there. So I'm always skeptical about those things where it is aesthetically pleasing, but I don't know how to explain the business benefits of doing the small increment. It might be useful if you're just doing a full rewrite and you're doing the big increment, but I'm always skeptical of architecture concepts where small increments give no benefit and large increments give small benefits. Whereas usually with good practices, good principles, it's the other way around. Even with TDD, a little bit of TDD goes a long way. A little bit of clean architecture goes a long way. A little bit of domain-driven design understanding, maybe event storming, maybe just the patterns, maybe knowing how to apply it to a conversation with your product owner goes a long way. But with vertical slice, I think there's something theoretical that we haven't distilled enough yet in the industry about vertical slice architecture. And it might be that it's just a nuanced version of clean architecture that we need to continuously distill. But I think something on this front will be improving in the next decade. So if you're still in the industry, especially if you're just beginning in the tech industry, keep your eye out for vertical slice or clean architecture. I'm sure there will be some book coming out. Well, it will merge these concepts together or give them some new nuance that just that just happens to escape me right now. There's like a key element missing to make it click, to make it obvious. Right now, it's not obvious, and you would have to force yourself a little bit to be a little bit more pedantic on the folder structure. Great question. Let's say on parts. Hitesh, while the course uses C# for illustrations, I'm assuming the knowledge is transferable to other languages and frameworks? Yes, definitely. So the course is very C# heavy. I would recommend that if you start the course, that you also learn to do C#, because it'll be much easier to follow because there are so many code examples. I think if you buy the course and you would just use it for clean architecture, and then you wouldn't code anything because it's C#, I wouldn't recommend it in that case. But if you're on the fence, check it out. Maybe ask Milan for advice. Milan is very DM friendly. Subscribe to his newsletter. Check him out on LinkedIn. Ask him directly. He's on vacation right now, but he'll be back next week. And now that I saw Hitesh's comment, I remember that I said Hitesh asked something earlier, and I said we'll apply it later. Yes, there we go. For someone transitioning from engineering to a CTO role, would clean architecture skills help? This question is from a small startup scale perspective. What other skills besides the engineer should one work upon? It's a very good question. I'm glad you reminded me to check it. This will be the last question that I can address. I'm very sorry for the others in the audience. Okay, one more question. Okay, Dushan, I see you. Okay, one more question after this one. Hitesh, I would say clean architecture is very important, but only if the team wants to. If you're in a CTO role, especially in a startup, that can mean anything from engineering manager to VPE to CTO. You can be hands-on, strategic. I'm doing something similar with Vladi, who's also in chat. I would say if your team is excited about clean architecture, absolutely don't get in their way. If your team is not excited about clean architecture and you would have to mandate it, I think it will backfire. Usually, engineers who are lacking in just general, the craftsmanship skills that I talk about on this channel, about just the breadth of design skill, if they're lacking in design skill, clean architecture is useful, but it shouldn't be the first thing. With a team, for example, that I'm coaching now, they want TDD, DDD, clean architecture, but there are some basics that are lacking. The CI/CD pipeline, the refactoring skill, code smells, reviews are a little bit too Spartan on just bug checks and not enough refactoring focus and quality focus and code smell focus. So definitely clean architecture. Would clean architecture skills help? Yes, they would help. Would I make it my first priority? Probably not. I would very rarely make clean architecture my first priority. As I said earlier, Clean architecture is not something you do. Clean architecture is an output of refactoring continuously using solid principles and using good object-oriented design principles with TDD, with domain-driven design, with event storming, with big design upfront if you need it, with good agile practices, and applying it to your entire system architecture level, not just code, but the entire system architecture. Then the output of that, of a well-run, disciplined team, that's clean architecture. But you have to work on something that provides business value. So the messy big ball of mud monolith that provides business value, that comes first. And then you refactor that and you clean it into a much cheaper version of that that's easy to maintain. The output of that cleaning of the big ball of mud, that's clean architecture. A lot of people think clean architecture is avoiding building the big ball of mud in the first place, but then you go out of business, right? So you got to be careful about this one. Great question. Okay, last question now. Dusan Knežević. Would you use this architecture in a project with infrastructure layer, which includes data access logic and F# via direct SQL type providers? Very good question. I'm glad we got time to grab this one. Actually, we don't have time because I need to jump off. Clean architecture is about your domain layer, application, and infrastructure layer. If your database contains domain level concerns, then absolutely the database is domain layer. It's very likely that your domain layer is actually the other way around. If you have, for example, we did this last week. If you have AI, machine learning, stored procedures in a database, if there is compute, if there is business logic, invariance, compute in your database, that's a domain concern. There's a domain layer there. There might be open database connections to that, or maybe an application guarding the database. That's an application level concern. And then maybe there's some logins on how to access this kind of database. That's an infrastructure level concern. But the thing inside a database is a domain level concern. That is how databases were created originally, when all you could do is create a front end that gives you direct database access. That is what Microsoft Access was in the late 90s and 2000s. The database was the domain. But then we shifted this concern where the database just became storage, and the application reading from the database, that's where the real models then moved, right? So what you're describing is an example of that original traditional way of building a system. And absolutely, when you have compute and important business invariance and logic in your database, it's absolutely a domain level concern. Your application might not even have a domain. It might just be infrastructure for the database. But again, if you then have other adjacent services where it's more modern, it's the other way around, right? So there's a part of that database that is a domain level concern, and there's a part of that database that is an infrastructure level concern for your domain models that are in the F# side of the code, not the SQL side of the code, right? So you got to keep that in mind. But it's completely okay for some projects for these layers to be inside out, especially when the main thing you're building is a database thing, not an F# thing. Hope that helps. That's all for this week. I have to jump off because I'm late for my book club meeting. Thank you for the comment. I will leave the stream on for a little bit longer with some elevator music. The discount code's below. If they haven't run out yet, go grab some. There's only 20 left. There was only 20 left when I started showing it on screen. It's PCADC20. And see you again next week. Thank you all for making the time. I love this. Great audience. Sorry for all the technical problems, but we're learning, and next time will be better. I'm going to sign off with some elevator music. You guys can hang out in chat, connect with each other on LinkedIn, leave some questions. I will answer them later, and I'll see you all next week. So elevator music, you know the one, into space. Bye-bye.